Hey guys, I'm Airwingmarine. Welcome back to the channel on my next Escape From Tarkov video. We're going to dive into a Salewa guide now. That's why I'm standing in front of the med station, because the first answer is basically craft them. But if you don't have that available to you, I've got some ideas and places you can go loot that is going to maximize the chances you have of finding it. So let's get right into it. All right, as we talked before, the best thing you can do is craft these in your hideout. It's available at level 1. Yes, you do need a generator. You need a level 1 med station and fuel to make these work, but those are pretty easy hurdles to overcome. And I'll do a guide on spark plugs too, because I feel like that's another one people get hung up on, and we'll include that with some other loot guides as well. The big thing about Salewa spawns is they're heavily spawn dependent on a lot of maps. Basically, you need to spawn next to the high traffic areas, because if you don't, by the time you get there, you're either going to run into somebody camping the building waiting for you, which has got a low survivability, or they're looted and they're gone and there's nothing left for you to loot. The main goal is going to be focused on high spawn chance locations. So these boil down to medical crates, which are the big box crates that they say medical crate when you loot them. Med bags, which kind of look like EMS med bags. They got a medical thing on them, you know, they're zipper bags. And then med cases, which kind of look like a fishing tackle box or something, but they got meds in them as well. And then along with those are buildings that are medical themed buildings, things like Crack House or White Bishop on Reserve, or a big section of the FOB, the Forward Operating Base on Woods. These locations have lots of free loot spawns for meds, which increases your chance of finding not just Salewas, but syringes or pile of meds, or, you know, the soap and toothpaste and things like that that you need for other parts of your hideout if you're still struggling with those. Now, other places they can spawn as well are inside the ground and buried caches, you know, Jaeger's caches. Those things can spawn them. Sports bags can have Salewas in them, and weapon boxes. The flat black ones that kind of look like a weapons case that you use in real life. You know, they're 5 by 2 when you open up. They're flat and black. Those things can also hold Salewas. I found several in those, even this wipe. And on top of that, you want to just kind of loot every building and everything you can as you're moving around the map, because if you rush past a bunch of stuff to get to some of these higher chance locations, you might just be running past Salewas that are at the lower chance and never even know it. So the best advice I can give is that you loot everything as you go along. Yes, it's kind of loot goblinish, and that's how I play. I will not go past the location and check it for loot, because sometimes you find amazing stuff in there. I found ophthalmoscopes on top of shelves and cabinets that if you just ran by them, you would have never have seen them. So just keep that in mind when you're looting. And now we'll get into the specific map guides and talk about those more specifically. All right, so customs. This, in my opinion, should be your primary focus. Not because it's the best map for medical. It does have some good spawns, but because it's a map you need to learn, and there are tons of spawn locations, and it's an easier map to survive than any of the others once you learn it. I have a loot guide you can go watch, as well as a longer video that will steer you in the direction of how I rotate around customs, how I get through it, and how I have very high survival rates. And it's all spawn based. So whatever location you spawn on dictates where you loot and how you rotate around the map. But past all that, we'll talk about the biggest places on customs for spawning for Salewas. Now, the number one is Crack House. And this is what the community calls it. It's a kind of a medical test building. It's got the second floor looks like a, you know, they're making crack or meth up there. And inside this room, there's shelves all over. In the cabinets, you find augmented and morphines and Salewas and other meds, IFAKs, CMSs, the whole 9 yards can all be found in here, as well as the storage room that's across the hall from it. Great medical spawns in here. Now, down on the first floor, there is more medical spawns. There's this little cart here by the front or back door, the door that points towards Alamo, if you will. I don't know if you want to call it the front or the back door. This cart on it and around it, down on the ground, can spawn IFAKs and Salewas and other things like that, as well as the med case here on this shelf. These can all spawn Salewas. So this building's probably one of the best places in customs if you're looking for medical spawn. Second to this is going to be Alamo, and that's what we call, you know, some people call it Fortress, whatever it is. It's where the ZB13 extract is. You have to turn power on. This big building here upstairs has a medical box that you can loot, as well as a med crate. Down on the first floor, in what we call the loot room, but it's this room back here in the corner that's got some bunks and stuff in it. There, not only is there a med box back here, but these beds have medical spawns as well. And again, loot the boxes, loot the crates, check everything that while you're in here, because sometimes med spawns. There are also some free med spawns inside what we call the art room, which is the other room where there's a green crate and some food spawns and stuff like that. It's kind of in the middle. This, I mean, you can see why we call it the art room, but this room has some free spawn medical in here too, so check that as you're running through. Now, as far as some other places that are kind of less traveled, but can be, if you're there, they're great to check, is places like the medical closet in gas station. It requires a key, but this key is pretty cheap on the flea market. You find it quite frequently. I found dozens of them this wipe so far in jackets and filing cabinets. Inside here, there is a medical bag and a medical case, as well as free spawns. So you can have a pretty good chance. I've actually gotten 2 ophthalmoscopes out of here this wipe. So there is good loot in here to check as you're passing by gas. There's also a med bag behind old gas by what we call Giving Tree. It's inside this concrete pipe. You dump in here, there's a place to check. Also the cache behind you, a little place you can check right here for medical cases, as well as a med box above the hill behind new gas, which we call power, kind of. Up on here in this little shack, there's a med case in here as well that you can check. And then there's another one in the warehouse warehouse 4. In the basement underground where the hole's blowing open. This is where the switch for power is for ZB13 and the whole map. Down here, there's a med case as well you can loot. On top of this, you have solo med bags in storage, between Crossroads and Trailer Park. There's one in the trunk of a car. The building next to Big Red on the road to custom side, this little blue building, it's got a filing cabinet and another med case in it. And then lastly, there's one behind locked the door 114 in 2-story dorms. This is a locked door. It's for a couple tasks as well. But with the safe in here on the bed, there's also a med case that you can loot. Other favorite spawns that I have are under green room. So inside, this is where the USEC stash is. I call it green room building, whatever you want to call it. Underneath the actual green room itself, on these cabinets, on this couch, all over in here, there's free med spawns. Free, by free, I mean that they just spawn loose. They're not in a case. They're open world loot spawns, if you will. And then in green room itself, upstairs, in the back room, all the way at the end of the thing, there's a med bag on the floor down here, or on the first floor of the cabinet. And there's some free spawns around and stuff like that. So make sure you check out all of these things as you're going through here. This will increase your chance of finding a Salewa. And that's kind of the moral of the story of this whole loot guide, is check everywhere you go. Just take a quick glance at shelves and cabinets. You never know when you're going to see something useful, even small, that spawns on these things. Now, next up is woods. And this one's a little bit simpler. This map is huge and there's tons of places to loot, and all of them can have meds. Places like Scav Bunker and the little outpost that's right next to it. USEC Camp, which is dangerous because it's highly looted, has med spawns in it. The Sunken Village and the town and the old sawmill. All of these places have med spawns. So that if you're there, they're checking. But the number one big place to loot here is the UN or USEC FOB. I'm not sure which it is. I would say it's probably UN FOB. But the FOB here that's on this portion of the map, on the side that faces the UN checkpoint, there is a tent. A couple of tents actually, but one big tent, and has a ton of medical spawns on the tables. There's also a med crate in here. On the other side of the camp as well, there's shelves and a bunch of stuff in all of these connexes that have tons of med spawns. So just hit all these med bags, hit up all the crates, find everything you can. A lot of people have come out of here with 4 or 5 Salewas in a single run. Now that's really lucky. My average is usually 1 to 2 out of this. Every time I hit it, I'll get 1 to 2 Salewas. But the big problem with this location, in my opinion, is the fact that you have to have a spawn next to it. Occasionally, if you don't spawn next to it, you'll get here and it's not looted. But almost every time I've ever not spawned next to this thing, by the time I get there, it's already picked clean. So just keep that in mind. If you don't spawn next to it, it might be worth checking on your way out, but you're probably going to miss out on the loot for a little while. And one other place I want to mention, but it's super high traffic, it's dangerous, is inside the building of the sawmill where Sturman spawns. Inside here, there's a shelf that spawns tons of meds. It spawns tons of other stuff, but I've come in here and found grizzlies and Salewas and IFAKs and all sorts of stuff. So keep that in mind. If you're here, poke in here real quick and check. You might be able to find some meds there as well. Now, the last one I'm going to mention for this guide is reserve. And I'm not going to talk about shoreline specifically because of how big it is, and 2, how many keys it requires. In order to be really good in resort, you need to have keys. Now, there are lots of medical spawns in resort without keys. So if you're going there, by all means, look through any of the rooms you don't have. But for the most part, in order to get into the really good medical spawns, you need keys. So we're going to talk about reserve because this one you don't need keys. Keys help, but a big portion of the spawns on this map that have medical spawns don't require keys. So the first one we're going to talk about is White Bishop. This is kind of the medical building, the hospital, whatever you want to talk about it. Check all of the unlocked rooms. There's a ton of them, and there are spawns everywhere. Every one of the rooms, even the rooms that kind of look like they're just like, big bedrooms that have 6 beds in them but no medical supplies, those can spawn Salewas. I found them in there many times, as well as in the basement. I haven't found a whole lot on the one side of the basement that's kind of like a command center. It's got some bunks and stuff, but there's this one room as you're headed into the bunker complex. Instead of going there, you kind of stay to the left or you go straight depending on what door you you come through. But in here's a medical room, and there's like 6 or 7 spawns in here that have all sorts of stuff. I found, you know, Salewas obviously because we're talking about that, but stims and all sorts of other goodies down here. It's a great medical spawn. And when you're looting all these things, make sure you're checking the cabinets really, really closely. Not just, you know, where things are obvious, but some of the shelves that are kind of tipped over, as well as the piles on the floor. These piles on the floor can hide all sorts of things, syringes, blood sets, stuff like that, that are kind of hard to see, but they're down there on these piles on the floor. So just make sure you're looking down and looking for that little white dot so you can pick up whatever's down there. Now, next up, there's some other spawns, and they're not quite as effective, but they're worth checking if you're, you know, your spawn next to them in there. And these are the pawn buildings. So first, on Black Pawn, on the first floor, there's a med bag on the end room here that's kind of facing White Pawn. You can check that, but the second floor has a big medical area. And inside this medical area, you know, makeshift hospital, whatever you want to call it, there is a med bag, but there's also tons of loose med spawns. So make sure you're walking around in here and checking. You can find meds. White Pawn's kind of the same thing on the third floor. It's got this kind of medical room area, and there's tons of med spawns you can find. Black Bishop, which is between the Pawns and White Bishop, people call it the schoolhouse. You know, it's got the drop down room, all of that. There's only one med bag in here. There's a couple of loose loot spawns, but the one med bag is the only hard spawn in here that I know of that I've ever found any kind of meds out of. In the basement, this is, you know, this is down where you would go down to the bunker system underneath everything, basically underneath the helicopter, if you will. There is one med crate in the middle here. So of these 3 crates that are in this open area, the one in the middle is a med crate. You can check this as well if you're down there. Above this, in the courtyard, there are actually 2 pretty good med spawns, but this is kind of a death trap. This area is really dangerous to go into because all 4 of the buildings around it can hear you and see you. And when they hear you in that direction, they know where you're at. But nonetheless, there's one med crate. It's right here on the forklift. You can loot that. It's kind of covered. You're a little bit safer right here. And then the next one is this yellow van. You know, it kind of looks like a makeshift ambulance or something they were using it for. But on the door on the side, there's a couple of med spawns you can check real quick. I've even found stuff in the back door that you can loot and find Salewas in. And then lastly, I want to talk about the keyed areas here. So over on the bunkers, over on the other side of the map, kind of where the hermetic door is, the hermetic door extract, down here, there's 4 cages. And these cages all have medical crates in them. But RB PSP1 and PSP2 have 1 crate, whereas RB PS81 has 2 crates, and then RBPS82 has 3 medical crates. So these are great places to check if you have these keys. Not very many people are going to have these keys and not have their Salewa task turned in, but I just want to point them out. They're there. Don't want to actually miss information. And then lastly, the RBSMP and RBKSM key, which are for White Bishop. These, same thing. If you can get into here, these have lots of medical spawns in them as well as med bags and stuff like that. Probably not going to have these keys if you don't have your Salewa task done yet, just out of, I think, random. There might be a couple of you out there who got these keys, but it's just an option. I wanted to point it out. These keys have good medical spawns in them. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up. There are more spots out there. Every map has medical spawns, but these are the 3 big ones I wanted to point out, the 3 maps where I wanted to point out for people to go find medical gear. I think it's going to give you the most likelihood of finding your Salewas and getting past that task. Again, you're better off if you're really struggling with this crafting them, but maybe you learned something here, or some med spawns, some places you can loot that you didn't know about. So appreciate you watching. We'll see you in Tarkov. Well, that wraps up the video. I appreciate you watching. Make sure you hit that like button because it helps out the channel a bunch, and subscribe for future content. We also have a Discord, links down in the description, that you can come join. We're filling up with a bunch of chill people who just love to play Tarkov. If you're looking to support the channel in other ways, we've launched a Patreon with some benefits like access to a Discord channel, constantly updated spreadsheet for my hideout calculations, and some other things if you want to go check it out over there. Lastly, thanks for your support on YouTube. It means the world to me, and I greatly appreciate every one of you. So with that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll see you in Tarkov.